Welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. If you have problems with the IRS, don't focus on the negative, focus on the solutions. With the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish. For over 15 years, he's been helping taxpayers with IRS problems reclaim their lives and their financial stability. Now, here's your host of the IRS Solution Attorney Show, Darrin T. Mish.
Good morning, and thank you for listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, and apparently I have a little bit of a frog in my throat.
Yeah, I'm going to let you get that frog out, and I'll finish opening the show. I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. Good morning. Welcome to the show, and I thought it was going to be me this morning that started with a frog in my throat.
Hey, at least you know it's real, and it's live, and because if we were tape recording that would be a do-over.
I know, you started to have like this little boy's voice. So you got to clean that thing up.
Well, you know, I'm just going through puberty.
Yeah.
Trying to get it all worked out.
Keep living with that. See how that goes. Men don't have like a male version of menopause, do they?
Yeah, it's called a midlife crisis.
Oh, yeah.
It's a Corvette and a girlfriend.
I hope Heather is not listening this morning. That's all I'm saying. You're in trouble.
I have neither, so it's all good. And I'm actually a little bit past the midlife crisis, I think.
Oh, you already had the girlfriend and the Corvette.
No, I did not have the girlfriend or the Corvette.
That's the running joke in our house, too, that the Corvette's the midlife crisis.
Corvettes are kind of nice. I can think of other cars that I'd like more. You know, those new Maseratis they're like it's a coupe, but that just seems more cool.
I would pick the Tesla. You know that.
You know, Tesla.
Of course I would pick the Tesla. I drive a Prius.
In 5 years, everyone's going to have a Tesla.
I know.
So
I'm going to get ahead of that curve.
That's part of the allure of the fancy car, is that not everyone has it. I follow another lawyer here in town who has a Jaguar. And, you know, a Jaguar, those are pretty neat cars. I mean, you don't see a lot of them, and they're pretty fancy, pretty special.
They're fast, too.
Yeah, I want to say he's saying it has like 500 horsepower. So for a
they're like 12 cylinders. Car, they're crazy fast.
They look really fancy. I think they probably still leak oil, just like all British cars do. But anyway.
That's a little bit outside of my scope when you start talking cars.
So today we're going to talk about who do you turn to when you have an IRS problem?
Mr. Darrin T. Mish. 888-GET-MISH. How's that for an answer? There you go. The show's wrapped up. What are you going to talk about next? What do you think about that, Pat? You don't have nothing to chime in on that one?
Oh, that's exactly who I'd call.
Trying not to be quite so transparent about all that. I think that is a great idea.
Knowing you, I'm a lot more relaxed now.
Oh,
just
very
in case
nice.
The IRS shows up knocking.
So yesterday we had a couple come in, or there was a couple came in and had a consultation with me, and it's kind of a tough situation. They owe, I want to say they owe about $75,000, but it's a family of 5, but their household income's up at $145,000. So they're not poor. You know, they have a nice standard of living.
How about the tax bill?
It's $75,000.
Oh, okay.
And the installment agreement, if that's where we end up, is going to be a pretty good sized number, a number that they're not interested in.
A housing payment.
And not quite, yeah, like a lower end house.
Okay.
And
it'd be like a rental property payment, but instead it's going to be an IRS payment.
We still had some more questions, so we couldn't come up with a game plan yesterday. They had to go do a little homework. And as the gentleman was leaving, he kind of sighed and he says, you know, I feel better already. He's like, I don't know why, but I feel better already. So that's good. And, you know, that's part of the plan when people come in to see us, is that to try to ratchet the anxiety and stress down just a hair, because, you know, these things do not have to be the end of the world.
You should put that on your door, like when they're exiting, either put, how do you feel today? Or how was your visit? Feeling better? Question mark.
I can actually see, I go out and meet every client in the lobby, you know, because it's 3 steps from the conference room that we're going to meet in. And I can see when I go out and shake their hand and greet them, I can see the anxiety. And part of my goal is to have the total opposite body language and everything as they leave. Whether we take the case or not, I mean, all problems in life are really solvable. And if you think about it, I think all IRS problems are solvable too.
I hope so. You better think all IRS problems are solvable or we're in trouble.
I was in a minor dispute with the Florida bar one time over one of my advertising pieces where I said all IRS problems can be solved if you're willing to take the first step. And the IRS wrote, or the IRS and the Florida bar are kind of the same in my mind. The Florida bar says you can't use the word can because not all problems can be solved. And my retort was, well, yeah, all IRS problems can be solved because if the solution is pay, then that's a solution. And that is a solution.
That's such an attorney answer.
That is the solution for a very small, portion of people. That the answer is, if you make $500,000 and you owe $5,000 to the IRS, my answer is going to be write the check.
Pay the $5,000. It's a speed bump.
Because it's just not worth your time, effort, anxiety, and all that.
So I'm curious, with being an attorney, if you have a dispute with the Florida bar, what does that look like? Because I imagine that the people at the bar are former attorneys, so they
are actually attorneys.
Well, they're current attorneys. Okay.
So if I have disputes with the Florida bar, typically this time I did not. This is a very minor thing. Because you know how attorneys
like to argue.
Yeah, this is a very minor thing. I actually hire an attorney that specializes in bar disputes, and I have him. I have his number in my phone, and I can call him, and we can get it handled. And the reason, it's not that I have a lot of problems with the Florida bar. I have not had hardly anything with the Florida bar in over 20 years. But the real deal is that when you have a problem, or when I have a problem, when I have some sort of legal problem, I typically, unless it's very minor, I don't handle it myself because I cannot be detached. I can't be objective. I get stressed and nervous and afraid and scared just like everybody else. And so I typically reach out to usually someone I know who specializes in that kind of thing, and I hire a lawyer.
You know how to solve those problems. Stay away from the bar.
You knew that pun was coming in there somewhere.
That's something that Pat has trouble with, judging by his Facebook post.
No, I don't really go to a bar. I go to a porch.
Tippy's back porch.
That was a nice back porch this weekend.
You say Amy's back porch.
Yeah, that was a nice one. I have a lot of nice porches on the weekend.
So to explain what we're talking about, Pat had posted some pictures. He was staying out over on the other side of the bay with nice waterfront property.
Well, I was actually in Apollo Beach, right, about 2 miles from the Chico Power Plant. You can see that in the background, and it's on one of the little fingers on Apollo Beach. And it's a friend of mine who has a home that's like, if you can't make it to Key West, you go to his house, and you're pretty much there.
Close
enough.
That's
great.
They do have a lot of Key West style homes over there.
Yes, they do.
My dad used to live there.
That power plant's quite picturesque.
Go see the manatees in the winter.
Yeah, that part's nice. That's for sure. So let's talk about
our topic.
Let's talk about what we're talking about today, and that's who do you turn to when you have an IRS problem? And I wanted to go over the 3 basic types of professionals that are entitled to represent taxpayers before the IRS. That means when a taxpayer has a problem or an issue with the IRS, there's 3 types of professionals. The first, of course, I'm going to mention is attorneys. Attorneys are licensed in particular states, and you don't have to be licensed in the state that you're in order to represent a client before the IRS. So, in other words, our train wreck today, our train wreck of the week, those people actually live in North Carolina, and they happened to see one of my videos or something online, and they decided that they liked my communication style and what I had to say, and so they just hired me over the phone, and it turned out great.
So how does that work? Like if it's a state tax issue, you just research whatever that thing is in that state, and the IRS is a national thing?
Yeah, honestly, I don't handle that many state tax issues, but most of the states, I've not run across a state yet that won't allow, attorney that's licensed in another jurisdiction handle the state tax matter. So I have handled matters in Virginia and New York and California and
all over
a variety of different states. The biggest reason I don't like to do it is because every state is different. And so you have, 50 or 51 different jurisdictions that all have different rules pertaining to their income tax and the Department of Revenue and whatnot. Some politicians think there's 57 states, but there's only 50 plus the District of Columbia.
Interesting. It's a math problem.
So he actually had claimed to have visited all 57, which is really spectacularly interesting. But anyway, so attorneys, we have ongoing, continuing legal education requirements, much like I think real estate agents do.
Yes, and then some.
So
to take our core law, to take our ethics every couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have to take I'm licensed in Colorado as well, but here in Florida, we have to take 30 hours every 3 years. In Colorado, I have to take 45 hours every 3 years. Luckily for me, they kind of overlap, and they're acceptable in both jurisdictions for the most part.
So you can take the same 40-some hours for both?
Yeah, and I always exceed the 45. It's never a problem, because if you're trying to just stay up on this one particular area of law, I take 16 hours a year without fail, and then there's anything else that comes along.
That's kind of how I am, too. It's hard to find a class that keeps my attention. So if I find one that meets the requirements, I try to sign up for it right away.
Yeah, and you probably do the automobile university thing, right?
No.
No, you don't listen.
What is Automobile University?
Oh, you've never heard that phrase? That's where you
books online?
Yeah, you can listen to audiobooks in the car and whatnot.
Oh yeah, I always listen to books, but it doesn't count for CE hours.
Oh, so
does that count for attorneys?
So we actually have, we can take our CLE. It's like self-study. You can listen to it and whatnot.
That is such a sham. I cannot believe that attorneys are allowed to listen to audiobooks as
I
CE.
actually listen to every single moment because it makes my job easier. And anything that makes my job easier, I'm all about that.
Well, real estate agents have to take real CE hours, like that count for certain parts, not just Audible books. But anyway.
Listen, as the co-host, I'm not sure you're supposed to be saying negative things about you.
I'm just picking on you. And you know the old saying, you pick on the ones you like. So.
When we come back after the break, we'll talk about the other types of professionals that can represent you if you have an IRS problem.
Don't go anywhere. It's going to be fun. If you want to call us, 888-404-1010. Back in a minute.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. And I have to say, we were talking during the break, and I stand corrected. I am sorry, because it is not just any audio book. It is specifically for continuing education for attorneys.
Yeah,
My bad.
If it was any audio book, I'd have hundreds of hours, I think, every 3 years.
Okay.
Because I do
that's
listen to
the way
a lot
I heard it the first time.
There's that's just a trick that I use. I listen to a lot of spoken word in the car, and that's probably one of the reasons why we're doing the show is because I like spoken word radio. But the reason I do it is because it keeps my mind active and it keeps me awake, and I think it actually makes me a better driver. If I listen to too much music, it puts me to sleep.
Where do you find all of these books in spoken word?
Audible.com.
I have Audible too.
Okay. Just on your phone?
Yeah. You can just go ahead and stream it via Bluetooth in your car. And,
yeah, because I'm thinking about, as fun as this show is, that you should start getting some IRS audiobooks and...
well, we could give you a
taking
list
the
of like
course.
other books. It doesn't have to be just, IRS books. There's a ton of
Absolutely.
other business books that you could add to your list. Like we could do a whole show on books, don't you think?
Yeah, right now I'm listening to a really good book on negotiation. And you would think that, in what I do, learning new and better negotiation tips would be important, right?
And then where do you get your traffic reports from? Or do you just audiobook yourself right into a backup?
He looks at Waze before he
So
listens to the book.
so I feel bad, saying this to Pat George, who's like a legend here in the market. But I use my phone on Waze. It tells me how the traffic is. And today it brought me a very interesting way to
Let me hear
the
this
station
way.
today. It was down. I live in Zephyr Hills now, and it brought me down 301 to 579 to I-4 to 275 to the station.
That's a nice route.
Yeah, it's reasonable.
Yeah.
It's all back roads and country until you get onto I-4.
Right.
And the only traffic there was just a little bit of congestion on I-4, which of course Pat knew about before.
Always around McIntosh and Nonosassa.
Exactly.
And then, of course, coming in by the Selman connector there.
That's exactly where it was.
Yeah.
See, I'd like to look at the traffic map and just kind of figure out my alternate route before I go.
While you're
and then
driving,
leave.
you like to look at that, huh?
Well, I look at it before I go, and then I just kind of glance at it.
Changes
like,
quickly.
I know it could. You're right.
We are up to the second on this radio
I
station.
know, and I do. I don't always listen to books. It depends on what mood I'm in. I
So-
do listen to talk radio a lot.
So we are very happy that you're listening to 1010 Money Talk and not listening to an audiobook or using Waze to
Yes.
determine how to get to your destination.
I go
today.
in and out, and I have periods where I don't listen to a lot of books, and I have periods where I'll listen to a ton back to back. I don't know about you. But
Yep, I do the same thing. Sometimes I forget that I have it, and I'm sort of out of practice. But my commute is twice as long now, so I have a lot more time in the truck.
it's a good use of time.
I think so. Absolutely. Just listening to political talk or music or whatever just is kind of a waste of time.
And the other thing too, like with the point behind the audiobooks is usually you're listening to whatever the relevant topic is for yourself at that time, right? Like if you're having a fit with your teenage kids, you might listen to a parenting book,
Absolutely.
right? Something like that.
Here's another little tip. I have trouble listening to slow speakers. I get bored really easily, and most of the narration on audiobooks is really slow, but they have a speed setting.
Yes.
You can turn it up. And some people sound great at double speed, but the book I'm listening to today sounds good at 1.25.
Don't listen to Gary Vaynerchuk
At
like,
double
souped
speed?
up, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would sound like a helium, voice.
Yeah. You'll be you probably have to re-listen to the whole book, but
But when he swears, it probably sounds really funny.
perhaps. I don't know. I don't usually double the speed up. If the book is that slow, I'll usually just skip it.
So getting back to our topic, is who do you turn to when you have an IRS problem? And in the last segment, we talked about how attorneys, obviously, are licensed in a particular state, typically one, sometimes more, and they can represent taxpayers all across the country. And I do and have, in fact, represented taxpayers in all 50 states.
And that's exactly what Darrin does.
That is what I do.
His number is 888-GET-MISH.
Or you can visit the website at getirshelp.com. You can download the podcast from iTunes or our app from iTunes as well. But the second type of paid professional that can represent clients before the IRS is a certified public accountant, a CPA. CPAs are licensed, again, in every state and all the territories and the District of Columbia and all that. And they have had to pass a very rigorous course of study, usually in university, and they have to take a really pretty rigorous test, and they have CE requirements and whatnot as well.
Now, is this your CPA or any CPA?
Any CPA is technically, able to represent clients before the IRS. And the one thing that I want to get this message out, okay, and that is that CPAs or accountant types, there's actually a third type of professional. Let me go over that real quick, and then I'll go over the difference between hiring an attorney versus a CPA or an enrolled agent. The enrolled agent is the third type of paid tax professional that can represent clients before the IRS. An enrolled agent is someone who is licensed by the IRS. And my understanding is there's two ways to obtain this license. One is by passing, again, a pretty rigorous test. It's a three-part test called the Special Enrollment Examination. Or the other way to become an enrolled agent is to have been a IRS employee for a certain length of time.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was just curious, who are enrolled agents, because I was thinking that basically they were CPAs. And there was one guy that used to do my taxes a long time ago that was a retired IRS guy. And I remember him saying he was an enrolled agent.
Yeah, so it's my understanding that former IRS employees, after a certain amount of time, and I'm sorry, I don't know how long that is, but they can become enrolled agents relatively easily based on their work experience, okay? So an enrolled agent is somebody federally licensed by the IRS to practice before them, and they can also obviously represent clients in all 50 states. Now, I think the big difference between having an attorney represent you and having a CPA or an enrolled agent represent you is the way we think in our background and experience in our education. I'm not saying my education is any better than a CPA or an enrolled agent, although interestingly, an enrolled agent has no special educational degree requirement as far as I know. They do have to pass the test, or they have had to have worked at the IRS, and I'm not denigrating anyone here, okay? But the difference between attorneys, CPAs, and enrolled agents is attorneys were trained in school, in law school. By the way, law school is a traumatizing experience, okay? It really is. Not taking away from people who've been in the military, and I was not brave enough, honestly, to serve, but it's a very much like a boot camp experience. It's very traumatizing. They really did say on the first day, look left, look right, one of you guys is not going to be here. And that's, in fact, what happened at my law school is they cut half the class after the first year.
Why? Because they didn't pass the testing requirements, or they just left on their own, or both?
We only have one exam in each course all year at the final. That's all there is. So if you had a bad day and you didn't pass, you got kicked out. So, talk about some stress. But
do you have to retake the whole thing, or you're gone?
Well, you were gone from that school. I know of some individuals who failed that first year and they went to another, they went to a different school. But then you're going to get into a lesser school,
each time
because obviously you didn't make it the first time. But not to segue too far, but I actually had nightmares for 7 years over the law school experience because they fundamentally changed the way my brain works. And it took me 7 years to just sort of come to grips with, okay, you're not going back to that guy you were before you went to law school. They have actually rewired your brain. And so my biggest point here is that attorneys are trained to think in shades of gray.
Yes.
Right? So
there's no black and white. There's a whole lot of in between.
Yeah.
Right?
So the goal for an attorney with their client is, how do we get to a win? Now, a win is defined as, in my mind, as whatever makes the client happy. Whatever the client, defines as a win is a win in my world. But to accountant types, they're trained very much in a world of black and white. 2 + 2 to an accountant equals 4 every single time. If you
it's
said
more of a fact, logical math, this is the answer.
Yeah, and so that's exactly right. They take a math-based approach to resolution of tax cases. I don't take a based approach to the resolution of tax cases because, quite honestly, math is not my strong suit. I don't want to attack the problem using the math. The math is almost always bad for us, right? So we take a very gray approach, whatever it takes to win. I call it my holistic approach. I'm not stuck with, well, we got to do an offer and compromise in every case. A lot of times an offer and compromise where you make a deal to settle for less with the IRS is not the best approach. You're not going to work. It's just not going to work. The math is against us. We have to take a different approach. So sometimes the best approach is a bankruptcy. Sometimes the best approach is to just wait, and let the statute of limitations expire. Sometimes the best approach is to get into a minimal installment agreement and just wait.
The other thing, too, with experience is you just can't put a price on that because I would imagine, maybe enrolled agents, but like CPAs, I imagine that's not their everyday thing to practice in front of the IRS. So it's a specialized thing and very math-based facts and arguments. So, it's no different in my business. It's going to be a lot different hiring somebody new or someone that sold a couple of properties a year or one property a month.
Very
versus
true.
Somebody like me. I'm going to see a lot of things before we get there.
Very true. And as a consumer, as a taxpayer, we assume that CPAs practice before the IRS every day, all the time. That is not the case. Most CPAs do not practice before the IRS. Most are not very comfortable practicing before the IRS. And I would say CPAs are probably my biggest referral source because, quite frankly, they don't want to deal with the headache.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Well, you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. Today's topic is all about who to turn to when you have an IRS problem. Big or small, we answer them all, and we're live in the studio. So if you have an IRS question, you can get it answered now. 888-404-1010, 888-404-1010. Thanks for listening to Money Talk. We'll be back in just a moment.
Are you suffering from IRS problems? Do you owe back taxes you can't pay? Is your paycheck or bank account being levied? Or maybe you haven't filed tax returns in years and simply don't know what to do. This is Darrin Mish to tell you that if you're tired of IRS problems hanging over your head and are ready for a fresh start, we may be able to help. Call the law offices of Darrin Mish at 888-GET-MISH, 888-GET-MISH. I can help you file old tax returns, work to release tax liens or stop wage levies, even negotiate deals to pay off back taxes at a discount, sometimes for pennies on the dollar. Hey, let's face it, these days it's not hard to get into tax trouble. A divorce, failed business, health problems, you name it. The point is, IRS problems may be solved if you're willing to take the first step. Call for a free consultation at 888-GET-MISH. That's 888-438-6474. Or go to the web at getirshelp.com, because the one sure thing is, IRS problems don't solve themselves. So get Mish. 888-438-6474. Principal Office, Tampa.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin Mish.
And I'm your co-host, Katrina Madewell. And we had somebody that was waiting for a question after the break. But
we had Vickham, but he hung up. So Vickham, call back. We're out of the stop set now. We're out of the break. Call back.
Okay.
I know that break was awfully long, Vickham, but you can call back and we'll try to get to your question.
We're sorry about that. We're sorry for the little break in the interruption. But so let's just recap real quick on the people you can turn to if you have an IRS problem. And then we're going to talk about some tips to help you choose the right tax professional for your situation.
Exactly. So there's three types of tax professionals that can represent taxpayers before the IRS. There are attorneys, CPAs, and enrolled agents. Enrolled agents are people who are federally licensed by the IRS to represent clients before the IRS. Now, there are a couple other types of people that can represent clients before the IRS. It's not really relevant here. Your tax preparer, if they are what is called an unenrolled tax preparer, they can represent you in very limited circumstances about the return that they prepared only.
Yeah, limited means there's stuff missing.
Well, they can't do an offer and compromise, for example. They couldn't do an innocent spouse claim, for example, but they could deal with audit letters and things like that for returns that they actually prepared.
Gotcha. So what are some things that we can do to help the person listening pick the right tax professional based on their situation?
I think you should check the professional's qualifications. So one of the things that you can do is, verify, like CPAs, I believe there's a website where you can go on and make sure they're actually licensed. I think there's a similar website for enrolled agents. There's certainly one for attorneys. The one for Florida attorneys is called floridabar.org. and you can go and check out any attorney's, disciplinary record and make sure they have a license, make sure that they are who they say they are. If they're in the local area and not licensed in Florida, and then there's at least one gentleman that I know of that does tax problem resolution here in the area, then you're going to have to figure out what jurisdiction he's actually licensed in and then check that jurisdiction to see if there's any problems. I know of no problems. I'm not insinuating that there are any problems.
But if there were, they would be there.
If there were, that's where you would find it. The other thing you should do is, try to check into their history. I was kind of alluding to that with their disciplinary history, if any. And you can always go to the Better Business Bureau. That's not a bad place to go. In my business, there's lots of companies that have toll-free numbers that are, located all around the United States. And you want to make sure that they have a decent BBB rating, or at the very least that they actually respond to any complaints that they may receive, because that's something that seems to be rampant in the industry.
So when you talk about professional qualifications, are there any designations that you think are more helpful than another if someone, has a tax issue, or for certain different types of tax issues?
Well, is something, this is interesting. A law degree used to be an LLB, which stood for Bachelor's of Laws. Okay. And that was like the generation before mine. So guys that are like 70 years old probably have an LLB. And sometime around, I think the 70s or the 80s, law schools started to decide, I guess they got together and decided that, law school was an advanced degree. It was at least on par with a doctorate. And so they called it a JD, a Juris Doctor. And that's what I have. It's the same degree as an LLB from somebody who was older. So that's the entry-level sort of law degree. And then there's one called an LLM, which bizarrely is called Masters of Laws. So if you're going to get an LLM, which is the advanced law degree, which I don't have, and I don't think I need, but if you were going to get an LLM, then you actually get your JD first. You get your doctorate first, and then you go and get your master's degree, which is kind of awkward.
I don't know why you would need that unless you're teaching law school.
Well, even then you don't need it, but there are certain areas, like there is an LLM in taxation, quite honestly, and that would be great for somebody who is putting together complicated transactions and maybe international tax things and things of that nature. And I just don't think an LLM would be helpful to me or my clients at all, because all I handle are these tax problem resolution type cases.
Right.
So, and there are no LLMs in that. And so I don't see that.
So there's no really specific designations that would
not
make somebody qualified.
Not in the tax problem area that I know of.
Okay. So service fees would be an important thing to ask as well, right? Like, what are the fees?
Yeah, there are some tax preparers who base their fees on a percentage of their clients' refunds. I don't like
think
this.
they were allowed to do that.
Yeah, they're not really allowed to do that, but you see this more in ethnic communities, where there's maybe perhaps in the Hispanic community or the African American community, or in other parts of Florida, there's like little Caribbean communities, And what happens is there's people who decide to do tax preparation for their communities, and sometimes those things they're not 100% legit, because there's unscrupulous people who go in there and prey upon those communities and do things they're not supposed to do. And what happens is, a lot of times when those tax preparers are basing their business upon being able to get the biggest refunds, that leads to fudging and then cheating. And then pretty soon what happens is enough of those returns get righteously audited by the IRS, and then the IRS goes and audits every single one of those tax preparers' returns. And what do you think happens to his business? I mean,
he's under.
Yeah, he's done.
Because everybody got audited.
If everybody gets audited, I mean, what's your loyalty to that particular tax preparer? It's zero, because the audit was painful and you didn't want to do that. So you just have to be careful about service fees, and you don't really want to do that.
So ask to e-file your return.
Yeah, professional tax preparation people, they pretty much have to file electronically unless they have fewer than 10 clients. There are some exceptions. So if the person is not, at least offering to e-file your returns, it's kind of a red flag. You might want to get that checked out.
Another thing, too, is availability. I know that's important in my business, too. People want to know, what is your availability? How can I contact you? Who do I contact if I have an immediate question or need?
Yeah, and I'd say this is my biggest complaint about the tax, or the storefront sort of tax preparation operations. The HR blocks, the Liberty taxes, the Jackson Hewitts, they're not typically there year-round. Of course, they have some year-round staffed locations, but a lot of the locations are not staffed year-round, and so it can be really confusing for someone who has a question or whatnot. They want to go back to the person who prepared the return and talk to them, and sometimes they can't.
I think of them as like tax mills. Like, I just wouldn't want to. I've never had my return prepared by any place like that.
I think they serve a function, and that function is to prepare,
like a drive-through McDonald's.
Kind of. Again, not denigrating anyone, but
no, but it's just different. Like I wouldn't.
Those simpler returns for people who get a W-2, you know, those people, a lot of those people want a faster refund. You know, they want the biggest refund that they can get, you know, while having someone do their return instead of doing it themselves. I see more audits caused by self-prepared returns than by anything else.
Yeah,
and that's just because people get the software and then they don't know how to answer the questions. The questions are all good, but if you don't understand the question and you click yes and it shows your refund go up, and or click no and it shows your refund go down, most people are going to click yes.
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, they're they want it
goes
from paying money to not paying money.
Exactly.
So, what about records and receipts?
You know, good tax prep people are going to ask to see some records and receipts. They're going to ask you some questions to figure out, you know, how to prepare the return. There are instances in our type of practice where we don't ask a whole lot of questions because we're trying to do what we call compliance returns. So if you come in and you haven't filed a return in 6 years, and we're not going to ask you a whole bunch of questions about the returns that were 6 years old.
You're just trying to get them filed.
You know, we're trying to get them filed because we know we have some other solution. We have some other option. So we're not trying to get the absolute lowest, you know, possible tax debt in those cases a lot of times. So we won't ask a whole lot of questions typically. In fact, I just had to get rid of a tax preparer in my office who was a CPA who came from an auditor background, and she just couldn't get her head wrapped around the fact that we were not going to pre-audit every return. And we just couldn't get them done because she didn't understand what we were trying to accomplish here. So
makes sense. And then the next thing on the list, which just baffles my mind, I can't imagine that someone would actually do this, but it's never sign a blank return. Yeah. Do you really see that? That should be a total red flag.
Don't sign a blank return. That's a huge red flag. Can't say that I've seen it, but I've heard of it happening. You know, I'm all about trusting people.
Like,
but
why would someone even sign a blank? That doesn't even make sense.
Well, you would not believe. It also doesn't make sense. The lady who got talked into giving, you know, what was it, $43,000 in iTunes gift cards by someone who said that they work for the IRS. But, you know, things that don't make sense happen. So don't sign a blank return. And
the next one is review your tax return before signing. And this is probably, I could see how this is a legitimate one because, hey, there's your tax return, sign them and send them back. Or the tax preparer that says, hey, come in, let's take 15 minutes together. I'm going to go through your returns with you.
Yeah, I think this is pretty big, really. You know, if more taxpayers just reviewed their return and tried to understand what each number on the return really meant, you'd prevent a lot of problems. Okay, but I know that most people don't review their return. I know what they do. They go to the bottom line. How much do I owe, or how much am I getting? That's kind of like the answer that everybody wants to know. And I have to admit, I don't prepare my own return. I have somebody that works on my staff do it, and I do the same thing. The first thing I look at is bottom line. How much do I owe? How much am I getting back? What's the bottom line? What's the deal? And then I go through it, you know, line by line, schedule by schedule, and correct any errors that I might find. And you would think that there wouldn't be any errors on my returns, right? I mean, the person works for me. I don't even
know if there would be an error, Darrin. Like, literally, it's a whole bunch of numbers, and I provide all the stuff to the bookkeeper. The bookkeeper gets the stuff to the accountant. So if there's a number in there that's wrong, I am not even going to notice that.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the problems that we have in our tax system. Right? It's so complicated that nobody even understands what it's about. And because it has the reputation of being so complicated, that we don't even try.
Makes sense. I mean, I do ask questions and skim through it, but I'm just saying, like, if the numbers were a little off or something was in the wrong place, I probably wouldn't notice that.
I agree. And you're not going to notice if it was, you know, especially on a Schedule C, if you were doing a Schedule C and the line was on advertising instead of, you know, I don't know, miscellaneous.
I don't even know. My tax returns are more complicated than I'm qualified to prepare.
I agree. And that's a great result. That's a great recognition that you have, is that you should not be preparing your own return.
No.
Not only because they're more complicated than you're prepared to handle, but also because your time is worth more in different areas than it is to crunch those numbers out.
Yeah, it would take me hours to do what would take a good CPA less than an hour probably to do.
Exactly. He or she's going to get the numbers. They're going to put them in the right places using their software, and it's going to get banged out, and it's going to be right for the most part. But I would just encourage you, if you see really big numbers that you don't understand what those numbers are, then you're going to want to ask some questions.
That makes sense.
You know,
makes sense.
Or if you have an S corp like I think you do, mm-hmm. and you don't see anything on that 1040 on the line for Schedule E, that's a problem.
Oh yeah.
You know, that's a problem, and we see it, and it's like, wow, you didn't.
Yeah, I would notice stuff like that.
You wouldn't think, you know, Mr. Taxpayer, you didn't notice that all of your Schedule E income from your corporation is not on the return.
We missed some stuff.
You didn't notice. Okay. all right, I guess. But especially when he didn't pay himself any salary.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. So just review the return and make sure that that you have a basic fundamental understanding of what's going on it.
So the last little tip on here is professional. Make sure they sign it and provides a PTIN. I don't even know what that is, but why is that even important?
A PTIN is it's their paid tax preparer identification number with the IRS. You want to make sure they sign it because they're vouching for it to a certain extent.
And
right?
If you don't have a signed copy, then if
they're not signing it, that means they're not proud of it, and there could potentially be a problem with it.
All righty then. Well, you can reach Darrin at 888-GET-MISH. Again, that's 888-GET-MISH. He's also on Twitter at Darrin_Mish and a couple other places.
You can visit the website at getirshelp.com, or the phone number is 888-GET-MISH. That's 888-438-6474.
And when we come back, we're going to answer some questions from some of our listeners. Thank you. We got a couple questions from Roger and Chris. When we come back in a few moments, we will answer them. If you'd like to call in, we'll do it this time as well. 888-404-1010, 888-404-1010. And we are back. Welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sticking around with us through the break. And as promised, we had some questions that we're going to be answering from some of our listeners. Thank you for tuning in. We're here every Thursday morning at 9 a.m. And you can catch up with Darrin at getirshelp.com. You'll find links to the show there and on the podcast.
So you can also download the app from the iTunes Store and the Android Store.
And so Roger wants to know, can I claim the earned income credit on 1040 Easy?
Roger, I have a confession to make. I don't do a lot of returns, and I don't do a whole lot of earned income credit, tax credit returns, so I had to look this up myself. Yes, you can, in fact, claim the earned income tax credit on the Form 1040 Easy. And if you can get away with filing a 1040 Easy, I say more power to you. That's great. That form literally is so easy. Most people could probably fill that out in about 2 to 3 minutes.
And so Chris had another question as well. He wants to know, what forms do we file to report a loss on the sale of a rental property?
Well, interestingly, that's that same Schedule E that we were just talking about in the last segment. A Schedule E is where you put your small business corporation profits, or in this case, your rental property income or losses in this case. It's interesting that rental losses are subject to a whole bunch of rules. Passive or active investor, that kind of material participation. There's a whole bunch of rules regarding rental losses. So you're going to want to make sure that you pass all those before you go ahead and put a big loss on that Schedule E for a rental.
And those things can change pretty often. So you definitely want somebody that's up to speed on current trends and changes in the tax law. And
that kind of brings me to another point about tax preparers that we didn't talk about in the last segment. And that is there are actual, specialists for different niches. So, truck drivers, owner operator type truck drivers, their returns are actually pretty complicated if you know all the ins and outs about truck driver returns. And so there are some preparers that just specialize in these little niches, are good at it, and they know the ins and outs of each industry. And if you're in one of those specialized types of niches, talk to your friends and competitors that are in the same sort of niche and find out who they use to prepare their returns, because it can be really important.
I mean, it makes sense to me. You would think people would do that because then if you're very familiar with a trade, you have a very clear understanding what the allowable expenses are.
Yeah, and frankly, it's probably worth a few $100 extra to pay that professional specialist in your niche, because you're going to easily make that up in owing less or having a
they may find a deduction you didn't even think about.
They certainly will find deductions that you didn't think about, because unless you've got your nose in the tax books all the time, you're just you're busy doing what you're doing. You particularly truck drivers, they're busy on the road. They're driving all the time. They're actually hard clients for me to represent as a tax problem resolution guy, because they're so busy that it's really hard to get a hold of them. They can't put their hands on records and papers because they're not at home. They're only at home, 2 days every 2 weeks or something. And they can talk on the phone, but
yeah.
That's about it.
Digital storage. So one of our ran out of time for the headline story, but maybe next week. So
that's a pretty interesting story. We'll get to it next week. Today's train wreck of the week. This is actually the segment of the show where we talk about somebody came into the office with a financial train wreck. They owed the IRS a bunch of money and they had no idea how they were going to solve it. In many cases, they are the type of person who comes in and they're sitting in my lobby and they're just they're biting their fingernails. They're really nervous and they don't know what to do. And usually we get together with them and we help them get it worked out. In this particular case, it was a nice couple that had actually seen some of my videos on YouTube probably, and then ended up on my website and decided that they, since they lived in this rural area of North Carolina, frankly, up in the Appalachian Mountains, they didn't have a lot of options locally. And so they contacted me. They owed $56,873. They both have regular type jobs. They're not earning a whole lot of money. And what we did for them is we decided to go ahead and file an offer and compromise. An offer and compromise is that program that we talk about a lot on the show where you can make a deal to settle for less with the IRS. And it's based upon relatively simple math. I'm going to go over it real quick. The way that the amount of the offer is calculated is by taking monthly disposable income multiplied by 12 plus the value of the assets, and that equals the amount of the offer. In this particular case, we were able to identify that they had very limited assets and they had basically had negative monthly disposable income. And so we offered, I think, about $500, knowing that the IRS is probably going to come back with a higher number. And that's okay with us, but we wanted to start the negotiation at around $500. And so we filed that offer in November of 2015, and it was about 6 months before the IRS contacted us and started discussions and negotiations and whatnot. They asked us for some additional documentation, and it came back they had $6,064 in assets. I think it was an extra car. It was a car that they had that was worth around that much. So the offer went from $500 or so to $6,064. The coolest thing is most of the time we talk about cash offers. Those are offers that are going to be paid within 5 months of acceptance of the offer. In this particular case, because all of that $6,064 was based upon the value of the assets, we were able to get them into what's called a short-term deferred offer. They're going to make those payments, that $6,064, they're going to make those payments over 24 months. That's $253 for 24 months with no interest and penalties.
Sweet.
So that's a pretty good deal. Even though they had negative disposable income, they're going to be able to figure out how to cash flow that $253, and it's going to be a happy ending for them.
But they didn't make them sell their car or anything like that.
No, I mean, they certainly have the right to sell that extra car if they want to fund this offer, but they're not required to do that. Frankly, I think they're probably going to get the $253 from friends or family or something. Take out loans from, informal loans, not bank loans, because these people wouldn't be able to qualify. But, $6,000 on $56,000, pretty good deal.
I think so.
And for them, it's going to be life altering. It's going to really change that state, that emotional state. And what makes me really happy is going to put an end to that tension in their household, that tension that probably exists to some extent in their marriage. Where I can tell you that I've been through money problems with in my life since I've been married, and it had nothing to do with my wife, but it causes stress and friction and tension. Mm-hmm. That's not good for your household. And so if you can get those things worked out, then by all means you should.
That's right. And if you have debt, you can always listen to Dave Ramsey in the morning or the afternoon. He'll teach you how to get out of debt. That's for sure.
And I don't think there's any big secret about how to get out of debt. It's a will to, it's a want to.
And live within your means. Like, that's a big part that nobody wants to do.
And if you can't live within your means, then maybe you should. Well, maybe
only live once.
Maybe you should expand your means.
Yes, one or the other, but either way, you're still living within your means.
Too many people in America go home every night after work and watch between 4 and 5 hours of television.
That's all?
I never watch TV, but I do know that football season is coming up because we have fantasy football this weekend, so I'll be watching a little more TV than normal.
I don't live within my means, and everything's expanding.
The waistline, the credit card debt, all of that stuff.
We should have talked about the RV roofer, but we'll have to save that for next week.
Well, we'll just put it this way. In about 45 minutes, I'll be $4,000 poorer.
That's the RV roof story right there in a nutshell.
We'll
the things we talk about here in the studio that have nothing to do with taxes.
They might. That one might.
It might. It could be.
You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. We got to go for this week.
We are out.